158 miles out to sea, she saw two German shepherds clinging to life. The truth behind it, will. How are German shepherds out here 158 miles offshore? Tim asked in disbelief, his eyes wide with shock. On the deck of the rescue boat, the two dogs, later named Bruno and Kira, shivered violently despite the warm blankets Emma had wrapped around them. As she comforted the larger male, her fingers found a collar engraved with H. Voss, Hamburg, a single clue that would unravel a shocking conspiracy. To discover the truth behind their impossible journey, subscribe to our channel, like this video, and listen to the full breathtaking story. The North Sea in a June gale is not a place for the living. It is a churning abyss of slate gray and violent white, a liquid predator that swallows light and sound. 158 miles northwest of Heligoland, the sea was trying to swallow Emma Braun's 40-foot rescue cutter whole. Waves like collapsing buildings hammered the hull, each impact a deafening boom that shuddered through the deck plates and into the bones of her feet. The wind screamed a high, thin sound of tearing metal, ripping spray from the wave crests and flinging it like shotgun pellets against the bridge windows. Inside, the world was a chaotic ballet of controlled desperation. The air was thick with the scent of ozone diesel and cold, wet fear. Emma, her knuckles white on the helm, kept her eyes glued to the oscillating sweep of the radar, her face illuminated in its sickly green glow. For 6 hours, she and her two-man volunteer crew had been chasing a ghost, an EPIRB signal from a sailing yacht, the Sturmvogel, that had winked into existence 2 days ago before vanishing. It was a fool's errand, a search for a needle in a collapsing haystack. But it was their job. Anything on the thermal, she yelled over the engine's roar. Tim, a young man with a face pale from seasickness and tension, shook his head, his eyes scanning his own monitor. Nothing, skipper, just cold water. Of course, anything out here would have lost its heat signature hours, if not days ago. The water temperature was a brisk 8 degrees Celsius. Survival time was measured in minutes. Still, they searched. It was the code. You search until you are ordered to stop, or until there is nothing left to search for. Emma grabbed the spotlight control, cutting a brilliant white path through the pre-dawn gloom. The beam danced madly across the heaving surface of the water, revealing momentary glimpses of a liquid mountain range, vast and indifferent. She swept the beam left, then right, a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. And then she saw it. It wasn't the yacht. It wasn't a life raft. It was a splintered section of a wooden mast, perhaps 10 feet long, pitching violently in the swell. An ordinary piece of flotsam, the kind of sea trash that littered the shipping lanes. She was about to pan away when something on the wreckage caught the light. Two shapes, two dark, unmoving lumps clinging to the wood. Tim's starboard side 100 meters, she barked, her voice cracking. What is that? Tim squinted, wiping condensation from the window. Debris? Wait, is that? Emma held the spotlight steady. The waves lifted the mast high, and for a heart-stopping second, the shapes were clearly illuminated. They were not lumps. They were animals, huge, dark-furred, and impossibly terrifyingly alive. As the light hit them, one of them lifted its head, its sleek skull, and pointed ears, the unmistakable silhouette of a German shepherd. A low, exhausted growl, too weak to be threatening, was ripped away by the wind. They were drenched, their fur plastered to their frames, shivering so violently it seemed the motion alone would dislodge their grip. They were clinging to the splintered wood with the last vestiges of their strength, two living creatures in a world that had declared them dead. Emma's breath hitched. Her mind reeled, unable to process the sheer impossibility. Not birds, not seals, dogs. Two German shepherds, 158 miles from the nearest shore, clinging to life in the heart of a North Sea gale. The shock was a physical blow, a jolt of ice water to her soul that was colder than the sea itself. "Get the nets," she commanded, her voice a whisper of disbelief. "Get the goddamn nets. Now." To understand why Emma Braun was willing to risk her boat and crew for two dogs, you had to understand the ghosts that sailed with her. At 42, with strands of premature silver streaking her brown hair and a web of fine lines around her piercing blue eyes, Emma was a creature of the sea. She had been born to it, the daughter of a Cuxhaven fisherman, and had sought to master it, graduating from the German Naval Academy with honors. She'd served 10 years as a navigation officer on a frigate, a rising star whose career was as bright and limitless as the open ocean. Then came the incident in the Gulf of Aden, a routine anti-piracy patrol, a sudden attack, a fire in the engine room. An order given, an order misunderstood, a sealed compartment, 2 lives lost. Though officially cleared of wrongdoing, the whispers in the corridors and the faces of the dead men in her dreams were a verdict she could not appeal. She resigned her commission a year later, the sea now a place of penance, not promise. She returned to Cuxhaven, the port town at the mouth of the Elbe, where the river's brown water surrenders to the North Sea's gray. With her severance and a small inheritance, she bought the Hanseat, a sturdy, no-nonsense cutter, and founded a small private maritime search and rescue operation. She ran charters for marine biologists and serviced offshore wind farms to pay the bills. But her true purpose, the thing that got her out of bed before dawn, was responding to the calls the official Coast Guard deemed too low probability. She searched for ghosts because she was haunted by them. The rescue of the 2 dogs was a blur of frantic, high-stakes action. Tim and Lars, her other crewmen, worked with grim efficiency, deploying the wide rescue net. It was a dangerous maneuver, bringing the Hanseat close to the pitching debris. One miscalculation, one rogue wave, and the mast could hold their hull. Emma held the cutter steady, with a surgeon's precision, her years of naval training taking over her mind, blessedly silent for the first time in years. They got the larger male into the net first. He was dead weight, barely conscious, but as they hauled him over the gunwale, he let out a weak, rumbling growl. The second, a slightly smaller female, was even more difficult. She was tangled in some rigging, and Lars had to lean precariously over the side with a knife to cut her free. Finally, they were both aboard, collapsing onto the deck in a heap of shivering, sodden fur. They were magnificent animals, even in their wretched state. Purebred German shepherds, one, a sable male of around 90 pounds, the other, a black and tan female. Their paws were raw and bleeding, their eyes glassy with hypothermia and exhaustion. Emma and her crew stripped off their own jackets, wrapping the dogs in anything dry they could find. As Emma worked on the male, trying to get some warm water into him, her fingers brushed against his collar. It was thick, heavy-duty black nylon, far more robust than a typical pet collar. A small circular metal tag was riveted to it. Wiping away the grime and salt, she could just make out the engraved text, H. Voss, Hamburg. Beneath the name was a phone number. It was a lead, a thread connecting these impossible creatures to the world of solid ground. But as she ran her thumb over the collar, she felt something else. A subtle thickness, an unnatural stiffness in one section. It was barely perceptible, a slight bulge in the woven nylon. Her sailor's intuition, honed by years of noticing things that were out of place, tingled. This was no ordinary dog collar. Back at the Cuxhaven docks, under the flat gray sky of a German summer, the inciting incident crystallized. The dogs, now named Bruno and Kira by the veterinarian Dr. Hannah, were stabilized, but still in critical condition. Hannah confirmed Emma's suspicion. These were not just pets. "They're working dogs, Emma," she'd said, pointing to the faint calluses on their muzzles and their incredible muscle definition. Police, military, something. And their paws aren't just raw from the water. There are splinters, deep ones. They were in some kind of explosion. An explosion. The missing yacht Sturmvogel, the name on the collar, H. Voss. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. That evening, alone in the quiet cabin of the Hanseatic, Emma sat with the collar. She took a small, sharp knife and carefully, meticulously picked at the thick stitching over the bulge. It was slow work. The thread was waxed and heavy, but finally a small flap of nylon pulled away, revealing a hidden pocket. And inside that pocket, nestled in a sliver of waterproof foam, was a tiny metallic object no bigger than her thumbnail. It was a micro SD card sealed in a watertight casing. Emma stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs. This changed everything. This wasn't just about finding a lost owner. The dogs weren't just survivors, they were messengers. Hans Voss hadn't just gotten lost in a storm. He had sent a message from the bottom of the sea, and he had entrusted it to his loyal companions. At that moment, Emma's mission solidified. Her goal was no longer just to understand what happened. It was to ensure that the message was delivered. The decision to involve the authorities was not one Emma took lightly. She was a woman who instinctively mistrusted bureaucracy, a system that had, in her view, failed her. But a potential murder and a cryptic data key were far outside the purview of a civilian rescuer. After a sleepless night, she made a call not to the local police, but to the Wasserschutzpolizei, the water police in Hamburg, reasoning that they would have jurisdiction over a maritime incident. She was put through to Detective Lieutenant Anna Schmidt, a woman whose voice was as crisp and no-nonsense as a starched uniform. Emma explained the situation from the rescue to the discovery of the data key, her words measured and precise. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You are currently in possession of potential evidence in the disappearance of Hans Voss." Anna finally asked, her tone unreadable. "I am Emma, confirmed. Do not touch the card again. Do not insert it into any device. I am sending 2 officers from our Cuxhaven branch to retrieve it and take your official statement. Stay where you are." The line went dead. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of official procedure. 2 grim-faced officers collected the collar and the data key, handling them with an almost religious reverence. Emma spent hours giving her statement, recounting every detail of the rescue. She learned more about Hans Voss. He wasn't just a sailor. He was a retired, highly decorated investigator for the German Customs Service Zoll. He had a reputation for being relentless, a bloodhound, who even in retirement occasionally took on private consulting work on maritime security matters. The Sturmvogel was his private vessel. The official theory was that he was caught in the unexpectedly violent gale. Anna Schmidt herself drove up from Hamburg the next day. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a manner that radiated competence. She met Emma at the veterinary clinic where Bruno and Kira were slowly recovering. Dr. Brown Anna began her gaze fixed on the two dogs resting in their kennel. Bruno, the larger male, lifted his head and watched them, a low rumble in his chest. Kira remained curled tightly against him. "Your actions were extraordinary." "They're the extraordinary ones," Emma deflected. Indeed, Anna agreed, a flicker of something admiration perhaps in her eyes. "Hans Voss was one of ours, not WSP, but Zoll. We worked with him. He was a good man, stubborn as a barnacle, but good." She turned to face Emma directly. "The data key you found is heavily encrypted. Our cybercrime unit is working on it. But its very existence hidden like that turns a missing person case into a potential homicide." This was the first complication. The case was now official, and Emma was on the outside. Her role was over, but she couldn't let it go. She had pulled those dogs from the water. She felt a fierce protective bond with them, and by extension, with the man who had so clearly loved them. What was he working on? Emma asked, her tone more of a demand than a question. Anna gave her a long, appraising look. "I can't discuss the details of an ongoing investigation with a civilian." "Those dogs aren't civilians." Emma countered, her voice low and intense. "They were his partners, and they're under my care. That makes me more than a bystander." A fragile, unspoken alliance began to form between the two women, built on a shared respect for the dead man and a desire for the truth. Anna, seeing Emma's resolve and recognizing her unique connection to the case, began to cautiously share information. The cybercrime unit managed to break the first layer of encryption. The card contained meticulous logs. Voss had been tracking the movements of several container ships belonging to a specific Hamburg-based logistics firm, Interport Shipping. He had noted discrepancies in their cargo manifests and sailing routes, subtle deviations that only a man with his experience would spot. He suspected they were using a corridor in the North Sea for illicit transfers. He was freelancing, Anna explained over a cup of coffee at a dockside cafe. He brought his suspicions to his old contacts at Zoll, but they told him he didn't have enough to open a formal inquiry. So he went out on the Sturmvogel to get the proof himself. With his dogs, Emma murmured, looking out at the gray water. They were his former K9 partners from his service, Anna confirmed. Trained in detection. He probably thought they could sniff out whatever was being smuggled. The stakes were rising. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was organized, corporate, and professional. And the people involved had already killed a highly trained federal agent to protect their secret. A new complication arose a week later. The dogs were well on their way to recovery, and Emma had moved them to a kennel at her secluded home a few miles outside Cuxhaven. One evening, a dark sedan with Hamburg plates was seen driving slowly past her property multiple times. The next morning, she found the latch on the kennel gate had been tampered with, the metal scratched and slightly bent. It could have been teenagers, a random act of vandalism. But she knew it wasn't. She called Anna immediately. "They know," Emma said, her voice tight. "They know the dogs survived." The threat was no longer abstract. It was at her doorstep. The smugglers, whoever they were tying up loose ends. And the two dogs, along with the woman who saved them, were the last loose ends. Anna arranged for a discreet police presence near Emma's home, but the message was clear. Emma was now a target. The conflict had become personal, the danger immediate. Her quiet life of penance had been shattered, replaced by a fight she never asked for, but was now determined to win. The attempted break-in at Emma's home was the fulcrum on which the entire case pivoted. For Anna Schmidt, it was confirmation that they were not just dealing with white-collar criminals hiding behind shipping manifests, but with a ruthless organization willing to use violence to protect itself. For Emma, the scraped metal on the kennel latch was a declaration of war. The fear she felt was cold and sharp, but beneath it, something else was hardening, a steely resolve that had lain dormant since she'd left the Navy. She was no longer just a witness or a rescuer. She was a guardian. The true turning point, however, came from the encrypted data key. After a week of relentless work, Anna's cybercrime unit finally broke the final layer of encryption. Anna drove to Cuxhaven herself to deliver the news, her face grim. They met in Emma's kitchen, the two dogs lying watchfully at her feet. Bruno's head was on his paws, but his amber eyes tracked Anna's every move. "It's worse than we thought," Anna said, foregoing any preamble. She slid a tablet across the table. Voss wasn't just tracking smugglers. He had uncovered a pipeline. On the screen was a diagram of a complex network. Interport shipping was the logistical front, but the real power lay with a shell corporation connected to a shadowy international arms dealer. They weren't smuggling drugs or counterfeit goods. They were moving military-grade electronics guidance systems, drone components, and encrypted communication arrays to embargoed nations. The port of Hamburg was their European hub. Voss found their transfer point. Anna continued tapping a location on a digital sea chart on the tablet. It was a specific set of coordinates in the German Bight, not far from where Emma had found the dogs. They use a modified container ship, the Odessa, to rendezvous with smaller, faster vessels in international waters. They make the switch at sea under the cover of darkness or bad weather. The revelation was staggering. This was a matter of national security. But the most chilling part was yet to come. "There's one more file," Anna said, her voice dropping. "It's a fragmented audio log." Voss must have activated it in his final moments. She pressed play. The sound of a howling wind and crashing waves filled the small kitchen, the same sounds Emma had heard from the bridge of the Hanseat. Then a voice, strained but clear. It was Hans Voss. "Log entry June 6th, 2000 hours. They're here, faster than I expected. A black RHIB, no markings. They've matched my course. They're not here to talk. Bruno Kira. Zumir." Here the command was sharp professional. A brief pause filled with the sound of the dogs whining anxiously. Then Voss's voice, again softer, laced with a terrible finality. "Gut Jungs, feine Hunde. Good boys, fine dogs." Then another voice, distorted by the wind, yelling in German from across the water. "Voss, cut your engine." Now Voss's voice came back, a low growl of defiance. "Go to hell." The final sound on the recording was not the explosion itself, but the deafening roar of a powerful engine accelerating, followed by a sharp percussive crack that was unmistakably a gunshot. Then silence. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Hannah the vet had said the dog's paws were full of splinters. She had assumed it was from the boat breaking up. Now she knew the truth. Voss hadn't been blown up by a bomb planted on his boat. He had been run down his yacht, smashed to pieces by a larger, faster vessel. He was executed. This was the point of no return. It was no longer an investigation. It was a hunt. And the nature of Emma's role underwent a profound shift. The sea, her place of penance, had now given her a mission of retribution. Her knowledge was no longer peripheral, it was critical. The Odessa Emma said, her voice eerily calm. "I know that ship." Her mind, the mind of a naval officer, was already working, connecting dots. She's a rust bucket, but her engines were refitted last year. She's faster than she looks. She's due back in Hamburg in 3 days. Anna looked at her, a new level of respect in her eyes. How do you know that I run a charter business? Lieutenant Emma replied, a cold fire in her eyes. I know the shipping schedules better than I know my own name. It's my job to know what's moving on the water. In that moment, Emma Braun ceased to be a reactive victim of circumstance. She was no longer just protecting the dogs. She was proactive, a vital asset with unique knowledge. The smugglers had brought the violence of the open sea to her doorstep. Now, she would use her own mastery of that world to help bring them down. Her goal had evolved from seeking truth to actively forging justice. The ghosts of the men she'd lost in the Gulf of Aden seemed to recede, replaced by the determined face of one man who had died fighting. She owed it to him and to the 2 living, breathing pieces of his legacy now lying at her feet. The 3 days leading up to the Odessa's arrival were a crucible of tension. The investigation, now supercharged with the information from Voss's data key, moved at lightning speed. Anna Schmidt assembled a massive joint task force pulling in officers from the federal police and the Zoll. The operation was classified at the highest level. The target was no longer just a smuggling ring, it was a critical node in a global arms trafficking network. Emma's house became an unofficial forward command post for the maritime side of the operation. Spread across her large wooden dining table were nautical charts, tide tables, and shipping manifests. Emma, in her element, was transformed. The quiet, haunted woman was gone, replaced by the sharp-focused naval officer she once was. She traced routes with her fingers, predicted currents, and explained the intricate dance of vessels in the narrow channels of the Elbe leading to the port of Hamburg. They won't make their move on the open sea. This time, she explained to Anna and her lead tactical officer, a stern-faced man named Richter. They know we're onto them. They'll try to offload the components inside the port itself. It's riskier, but it's faster, and they'll be counting on the chaos of a busy port to hide their activities. She pointed to a specific location on the chart. Here, the Waltershofer Hafen. It's one of the older container terminals, less automated surveillance than the newer ones. They'll bring the Odessa into this berth. The consignment will be in a specific container. A truck from Interport Shipping will be waiting papers all in order, ready to move it before it can be officially scanned by customs. Her knowledge was invaluable. She knew the port's blind spots, the moments during shift changes when security was laxest, the ways a ship's captain could subtly delay docking procedures to align with a waiting vehicle. She was giving the police a tactical playbook written from a lifetime at sea. Meanwhile, the danger to Emma and the dogs escalated. The people behind Interport were getting desperate. They knew something was wrong. A second, more direct attempt was made. A delivery van, later found to be stolen, tried to force Emma's car off a quiet country road as she returned from buying supplies. It was only her skill behind the wheel and the sudden appearance of a patrolling police car that Anna had assigned to shadow her that prevented disaster. The incident was terrifying, but it galvanized her. That night she experienced her own dark night of the soul. Sitting in the dark, the only sound the soft breathing of the dogs beside her, she confronted the enormity of what she was doing. She was a civilian who had willingly stepped into the crosshairs of a deadly criminal organization. She thought of her quiet life, the simple charters, the lonely penance. She could have handed over the data key and walked away. No one would have blamed her. But then she looked at Bruno. The big male shepherd rested his head on her knee, his amber eyes full of a deep, unwavering trust. He and Kira had survived the impossible. They had carried their master's last testament through a raging sea. They had trusted her, a stranger, to save them. Hans Voss had trusted them to carry his legacy. It was a chain of trust, and she was the final link. Walking away would not just be an act of self-preservation, it would be a betrayal. When the sun rose, her resolve was absolute. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. The final preparations for the raid were meticulous. Anna's team identified the key players, a corrupt port logistics manager named Krenz, and the CEO of Interport Shipping, a man named Ulrich Becker, who was orchestrating the entire operation. The plan was to let the Odessa dock. They would let Krenz clear the specific container. They would let the Interport truck load it. They wanted to catch them all red-handed with the illegal cargo. On the final night, Anna came to Emma's house one last time. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Tomorrow at 600, Anna said, "You've done more than enough, Emma. You should stay here where it's safe." Emma shook her head. "Voss died on the water. This needs to end at the water's edge. I won't be in the way, but I need to be there. I need to see it through." Anna studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you stay with me." "Understood, understood," Emma replied. As Anna left, Emma knelt and wrapped her arms around Bruno's thick neck. For Voss, she whispered into his fur. The dog whined softly and licked her hand as if he understood everything. The stage was set. The players were in position. The gray light of dawn would bring the final confrontation. The Waltershofer Hafen at dawn was a landscape of giants. Towering container cranes stood like silent skeletal sentinels against a bruised purple sky. The air, cool and damp, smelled of brine diesel fumes and the metallic tang of rust. From a darkened surveillance van parked with a commanding view of Berth 7, Emma and Anna watched the scene unfold. Emma's heart pounded a heavy rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and fear. At 05:48, the Odessa appeared, a hulking black shape gliding through the murky water of the Kurlbrand Channel, guided by a port tug. It was an ugly, functional ship stained with rust and grime, but it moved with a chilling purpose. Emma watched its approach with the critical eye of a sailor, her fists clenched. On the seat beside her, a tactical radio crackled with hushed, coded commands as Anna's SEK teams moved into their final positions, hidden among the endless stacks of shipping containers. The Odessa docked with practiced efficiency. Lines were thrown, the gangway was lowered, and the port manager, Krenz, was the first man aboard, his movements quick and nervous. A few minutes later, an Interport shipping truck rumbled into position on the quay, its engine a low thrum in the quiet morning. Everything was happening exactly as Emma had predicted. The targeted container, marked with a small, almost invisible chalk symbol, was one of the first to be offloaded. A giant gantry crane plucked it from the deck with surprising delicacy and lowered it onto the truck's chassis. As the locking pins on the truck bed slammed shut, Krenz signed the release form with a flourish and handed it to the driver. The truck's engine revved. It was the moment of transfer. The crime was complete. Zugriff Anna spoke softly into her radio. "Access. Go." The world erupted. From all directions, heavily armed SEK officers in black tactical gear materialized from the shadows. The blare of sirens shattered the morning quiet. Floodlights ignited, bathing the scene in stark, unforgiving white light. The Interport truck, which had just begun to pull away, screeched to a halt as an armored police vehicle blocked its path. The driver and Krenz froze their faces, masks of pure panic. They surrendered immediately, hands raised high. On the bridge of the Odessa, the captain and his first mate were apprehended without a fight. It was clean. It was perfect. But the main target, Ulrich Becker, was not at the port. A separate team had been dispatched to his villa in the wealthy suburb of Blankenese. As the raid went down at the docks, Anna's radio crackled again. It was the lead officer from the villa. Target is not at the residence. His car is gone. We have a runner. A cold dread washed over Emma. Becker had been tipped off. But then, a new voice cut in a traffic officer. Control, we have a visual on the suspect's vehicle. A black Audi A8, heading east on the A7. No, wait. He's taking the exit for Finkenwerder. He's heading back towards the port. Emma and Anna exchanged a look of horrified understanding. He's not running from the port, Emma breathed. He's running to it. He needs an escape route. Her mind raced through the possibilities. The Finkenwerder yacht harbor. It's adjacent to the industrial zone. He'll have a boat waiting. Anna was already issuing new orders, but a car would never get through the cordoned-off streets in time. They were in the surveillance van already inside the port complex. We can cut him off, Emma said, her eyes gleaming with fierce intensity. She pointed through the windshield. That service road, it leads directly to the back of the yacht club. I can get us there. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Anna didn't hesitate. Drive. Emma drove the heavy van with a skill that stunned the seasoned police detective beside her. She navigated the labyrinth of the container terminal not like a civilian, but like a fighter pilot in a canyon, her movements precise and economical. They skidded to a halt behind the Finkenwerder Yacht Club just as Becker's Audi screeched into the front parking lot. Ulrich Becker, a tall, impeccably dressed man, now wild-eyed with desperation, burst from his car and sprinted down the pier. At the end of the dock, a sleek, powerful speedboat bobbed in the water, its engine already rumbling. Polizei, halt, Anna yelled, drawing her weapon as they ran after him. Becker ignored her. He was feet from the boat when a deep, ferocious bark echoed across the water. From the back of a police K-9 unit that had just arrived as backup, an officer released his dog. But it wasn't just any dog. It was Bruno. At Anna's request, he had been brought to the scene officially to help search the container, but unofficially because Anna believed in symbols. The great sable shepherd, a blur of dark fur and righteous fury, bounded down the pier. He moved with breathtaking speed, his powerful legs eating up the distance. He was not just a police dog obeying a command. He was a K-9 warrior closing the circle. He caught Becker at the edge of the pier, not with a vicious bite, but with a powerful body slam that sent the man sprawling, his escape cut short just inches from freedom. As officers swarmed and cuffed the sputtering executive, Bruno stood over him, planted his paws firmly on his chest, and let out a deep guttural growl that was pure, triumphant justice. The aftermath was swift. The raid on the Odessa was one of the largest seizures of illegal arms components in German history. Interport shipping was dismantled, its assets frozen. The story of the rescue, the hidden data key, and the two heroic dogs became a media sensation. Hans Voss was posthumously awarded Germany's Federal Cross of Merit, his name cleared and his legacy secured. A few months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Emma stood on the windy bluff overlooking the Elbe estuary. The sea was calm today, a vast expanse of silver blue. At her side, Bruno and Kira, now her permanent companions, chased each other through the tall grass. Their coats were thick and glossy, their movements full of life and joy. The haunted look was gone from their eyes, replaced by the happy confidence of beloved pets. A car pulled up and Anna Schmidt got out. She looked more relaxed than Emma had ever seen her. The final conviction came through this morning. Anna said, standing beside her, "Becker got life. He'll never see the outside of a prison again." "Good," Emma said softly. "They found the wreck of the Sturmvogel," Anna added, "exactly where your data said it would be. They're raising it next week." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the dogs play. "Voss would be proud of them," Anna said, "and of you." Emma looked at Bruno, who had stopped his game and returned to her side, leaning his weight against her leg. She ran her hand through his thick fur, her fingers finding the familiar shape of his new, simple leather collar. The ghosts of the Gulf of Aden were finally quiet. The sea had taken much from her, but it had also given back. It had given her a purpose, a fight, and two loyal souls who had journeyed through hell and back to find their way home. "They're warriors," Emma said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in a decade. They just needed to find their peace. And in the quiet strength of the dogs beside her and the steady gaze of the friend she had made, Emma Braun had finally found hers as well.